The 21st of October 2003 marked the release of one of the final DCAU Batman direct-to-DVD releases, Batman: Mystery of the Batwoman. By this point, Batman the Animated Series was 11 years old, and Justice League the Animated Series was well into its second season, shortly before it rebranded as Justice League Unlimited. As the name might suggest, this is a film that introduces the DCAU version of Batwoman, who was quite an important figure in Batman comic books once upon a time. However, whenever people talk about the DCAU, Mystery of the Batwoman rarely passes their lips, and I'm going to try to analyse why this film doesn't get the love and appreciation of the other DCAU films and TV series. Let's look at the creative team behind the film. The story was by Alan Burnett, and the script was written by Michael Reaves, with Paul Dini acting as a consultant. What this means is that Alan Burnett had the broad idea behind the film, Paul Dini probably fact-checked, and Michael Reaves wrote the thing up and fleshed it out. The three men had contributed to some of the best episodes of BTAS. Alan Burnett essentially saved the show during pre-production by bringing the creative team together and getting them to sing from the same dark hymn sheet. They would go on to produce wonderful episodes like Two-Face Part 1, my favourite, and Feet of Clay, which was co-written by Reaves, and we're all very familiar with Paul Dini's contributions to the DCAU. The film was directed by BTAS storyboard artist and director of many episodes of Superman, The New Batman Adventures, Batman Beyond, and The Zeta Project, Kurt Gaider, with Tim Maltby and Jennifer Graves acting as sequence directors. These seem to be the first DCAU roles for Tim and Jennifer, but both had long careers in animation working on multiple superhero properties like Teen Titans, X-Men Evolution, and Hulk, Agents of Smash. But some key creative people that had been involved in practically every other DCAU show, like Bruce Timm, Glenn Murakami, and Dan Reba, were not involved at all, probably because they were busy with their other projects like Justice League and Teen Titans. Personally, I don't think that this matters, but some fans cite the lack of involvement from people like Bruce Timm as a reason why this film should be ignored, as if the film is lesser somehow without his involvement. I wonder if they say the same thing about Sub-Zero. The titular mystery of Batwoman revolves around her identity. She wears a skin-tight silver outfit with red gloves and no skin showing. Batwoman makes herself known to the world by targeting arms shipments being sent out by a criminal cartel headed up by the Penguin, Rupert Thorne, and Carlton Duquesne. They're producing deadly high-tech weapons that are being sold to the Kazian military under the table. Wherever their criminal enterprises take place, Batwoman will soon appear and cause a whole lot of chaos. The GCPD are quick to state that this Batwoman is entirely unrelated to Batman, but the fact that she chose that name while operating in Gotham City sends a clear message. Batman and Robin set out to identify this new vigilante and find out why she is so focused on the Penguin, Thorne, and Duquesne. It's really hard to talk about this film without spoiling the identity of Batwoman and her motivation, so if you want to avoid spoilers, skip straight to the next chapter. Still here? Okay. Spoilers incoming. So the twist of the film is that there is no singular Batwoman, there are three Batwomen. Kathy Duquesne, Rocky Valentine, and Sonia Alcana. Each of these women has a direct connection to the three gangsters at the centre of the story, and they work together to get their revenge. Rocky's fiancée was framed by the Penguin and sent to prison, ruining their relationship. Sonia's parents' business was burnt down by one of Rupert Thorne's men, with the subsequent hardship ruining their family. And Kathy resents her father, Carlton Duquesne, because his life of crime inadvertently led to the death of her mother. So you can see why Batwoman was designed the way she was. If any flesh showed, then it would have given away the mystery, because you'd see her skin colour change between scenes. As a result of this, her costume strongly resembles that of Batman in Batman Beyond. Although, as far as I can tell, there's no real connection. She doesn't have a technologically enhanced suit, other than the fact that the mask alters all three of their voices to sound like someone else. Batwoman uses some impressive gadgets to wage her war against the Penguin, Thorne, and Duquesne. She has a large backglider that looks like it stepped right out of the old 90s Kenner action figure line, as well as an experimental metal that can be shaped with a simple touch, while also being incredibly strong. It even gives Bane a run for his money. I think the most interesting thing about the film is the theme around the role of women. Kathy's resentment towards her father is compounded by the way he reacted to her mother's death, by giving her armed guards that follow her 24/7. On paper, that sounds like a good idea. There's no way anyone would be able to harm her, but she has no privacy. Every single thing she does gets reported back to her father, and as a result, she lashes out. Rocky, meanwhile, is underestimated by her fiancé. He doesn't think she has the ability to prove his innocence, and, thinking he knows better than her, refuses to see her anymore. His logic is that it's the best way to protect her, but all it does is break her heart. And Sonia? She laments how powerless to stop the destruction of her family she was. In an effort to take some control of her life, she became a police officer, someone with power and authority and the ability to investigate Rupert Thorne and hold him accountable. But she wouldn't be the first person to try to bring Thorne down within the confines of the law, with very little success. They're a far cry from the original comic book Batwoman, Kathy Kane, who couldn't be used in this film. One, because it would be too obvious who the new Batwoman would be to fans of the comics, and two, because Batwoman didn't act particularly heroic in this film, and DC didn't want their long-dormant character's name to be tarnished. After all, this Batwoman caused a huge amount of property damage with no regard for the people who might be caught in the crossfire. Ironic, given Kathy's motivations. The comic book Batwoman was introduced in 1956 to act as a love interest for Batman, and she wore a bright yellow costume with a red mask that left half her face and all of her hair exposed. When Batman went through his post-Adam West renaissance in the 70s, Kathy Kane would wind up being murdered by Ra's al Ghul and his associates as a symbolic act of banishing that campy era of Batman comics. Note that the more well-known Kate Kane version of Batwoman had not been introduced in the comics at this point, so this was the first version of Batwoman to rear her head in nearly 30 years. She had very deliberately been left in the past because of her association with the campy era of Batman. There's also a credibility issue that Bullock brings up.
Harvey, I think we got more than enough Bat freaks in Gotham already. I mean, sheesh, what's next? Bat Hound?
At this point, having a Batman and a Batgirl was just about tolerable, but three's a crowd, ladies. Speaking of Batgirl, the in-universe explanation for why she wasn't in the film never really sat right with me. Apparently she's off at college, despite having graduated years prior at the same time as Dick Grayson. Maybe she went back for another degree. I still feel like there could have been a better explanation. Maybe she was injured, or on vacation, or just, I don't know, busy. It's a minor point, but it has always irritated me. One of the things I find most interesting about the film is its visual style. Looking at the high-definition copy on the Blu-ray, you can see that this film is a mix of physical and digital media. While older shows like Beat-Ass and Superman were animated in the traditional way, later shows, like the latter half of Batman Beyond and all of Justice League, were produced digitally. Now, by traditional animation, I mean that it involved a team of artists drawing storyboards on paper. These would then go to a team that drew layouts on paper, which would then be Xeroxed onto acetate sheets and hand-painted by animation teams in Asia. About 1,000 of these animation cells go into each minute of animation. If a mistake takes place, then the original cell would be scrapped and repainted, although in some cases they might reprint the cell, make the correction, and then lay it on top of the original cell. It was all pretty laborious and the results could look a bit uneven at times. There's also the fact that it's quite costly to fix mistakes, so sometimes they just wouldn't bother, but I always argue that this slight wonkiness gives the end product a lot of charm. The transition to digital animation involved the artist drawing storyboards and layouts on paper, scanning them, and then animating them with software. No more paint or animation cells. More recent shows are drawn and animated entirely on computers with no pencils or paper involved at all. Batman Beyond was the first DCAU show to transition from traditional animation to digital animation during Season 2, which is why later episodes of the show look a bit brighter and cleaner than the first couple of dozen episodes. The end result is some very clean animation. It's smooth, there are hardly any errors, and generally it looks pretty good. The only thing that these shows miss is a certain artisanal feel that just can't be replicated on computers, or at least it couldn't back then. So that brings us to Mystery of the Batwoman. This film uses a mix of traditional physical media and digital media. Original background paintings from Beat-Ass were scanned in and used, while the characters were digitally animated and superimposed on top of the backgrounds. Hence the special thanks credit to Ted Blackman, the man who designed Beat-Ass's Gotham City. This specific background from I've Got Batman in My Basement is used a few times throughout the film, for instance. So let's compare this Gotham City to the Gotham City of the new Batman adventures, where the buildings were less of a character and instead were these dark monoliths that just existed. I have to wonder if this was an artistic choice or a budgetary one. It certainly is cheaper to reuse assets than it is to draw up entirely new backgrounds. Thankfully, this works quite nicely, I think, and adds a sense of continuity to the film. One area where I feel the film is a bit of a comparative letdown is in the music. There's a real noticeable difference in the score when compared to earlier DCAU shows, especially Beat-Ass. Now this is likely down to an issue of budget. Gone were the days of lavish orchestral music. Instead, it's mostly synthesized music, and it really makes a difference. Now it's not bad by any means, it just doesn't hit in the same way. Outside of the main theme of the film, which is played on a saxophone, I honestly can't remember any of the tracks, and I own the soundtrack. It's part of my massive Beat-Ass playlist, some 12 hours of music. Whenever one of these tracks comes on, it's always immediately noticeable, and not necessarily in a good way. When it comes to the vocal performances, they are excellent across the board, and that shouldn't be surprising because many of the voice actors reprised their BTAS roles. But the new cast members, Kevin Michael Richardson, Kimberly Brooks, Kelly Ripa, Elisa Gabrielli, and Kira Sedgwick, deliver strong performances as Carlton, Kathy, Rocky, Sonia, and Batwoman, respectively. But what do you expect when you have Andrea Romano as the vocal director, eh? 2 villainous roles were recast for this film, the first being Paul Williams, who was no longer playing the Penguin. Instead, David Ogden Stiers was cast in his place. Apparently this was a conscious decision as the crew felt that the script required a more menacing Penguin, and broadly speaking, yeah, it works very well. I've talked previously about how the Penguin was one of the few missteps in BTAS and to a certain extent in TNBA, but the version of him we see here is generally much better. He's an arms dealer, not just a fence or a thief. He's charming, he's threatening, and has no loyalty to anyone. He can shower Kathy with affection 1 minute and then casually call for her death a few seconds later. A lot of this can be attributed to David Ogden Stiers' performance, and he's a strong addition to the cast, although I will always prefer Paul Williams. The second villain to be recast was Bane. By this point, Henry Silva had retired from acting, so the part was awarded to Hector Elizondo. Now, Hector is a surprising choice for Bane, as he has a more mature quality to his voice and sounds a little raspy. It's not a voice that I would associate with that character model, but perhaps I've been spoiled by Henry Silva's performances. He's not bad by any means, and I think it's quite good that his accent is a bit stronger, emphasizing his Hispanic heritage. But again, I will always prefer the original voice.
This film is also notable for being the final appearances of 2 DCAU veterans. John Vernon as Rupert Thorne, who would pass away less than 2 years later, and Bob Hastings as Commissioner Gordon, who would pass away in 2013. Rounding out the cast we have, of course, Kevin Conroy as Batman, Robert Costanzo as Harvey Bullock, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. as Alfred, and Eli Marienthal as Robin. Each of these actors were experienced in these roles and continue to do a great job. As a bonus, the DVD of the film included a silent short film called Chase Me, in which Batman pursues Catwoman across Gotham after she steals the contents of Bruce Wayne's safe. It's an enjoyable short with some decent animation and a jazzy score, and I have to say that the Chase Me theme is probably the best bit of music on the entire soundtrack, but overall the short doesn't really add much to the package. It's a nice extra though. Generally speaking, this is a good film. Maybe not spectacular and probably not anyone's favourite. Let me know in the comments if it is your favourite though. But I don't think that it should be forgotten. So why doesn't this film get talked about much? Well, I can offer some ideas, although it's hard to speak on behalf of everyone because we all have our own preferences. For all I know, there's an active community of DCAU Batwoman fans out there that are scavenging for every little bit of info about this film. I just haven't come across them, if they do exist. The first thought I have is that this is the first and only appearance of Batwoman. She never appeared again in any of the tie-in material, such as the video games, comic books, or associated DCAU shows. Essentially, Batwoman's story was complete, so she got put back on the shelf and has been forgotten about. Additionally, the fact that the film is about Batwoman, a character who, at the time anyway, was closely associated with the zany campy antics of the 1950s, means that it may already have been an uphill battle to win some fans over.
Then there's the fact that in 2006, a new Batwoman debuted in the comics with much more fanfare. Kate Kane became a fan favourite due to her no-nonsense approach to fighting crime and won herself a legion of fans by being one of the first openly queer DC superheroes. By comparison, this Batwoman seems pretty tame.
I also think that the recasting of a few key roles makes this film feel a little unrelated. As good as David Ogden Stiers and Hector Elizondo are, they're not the BTAS versions of the characters, and they're not even the TNBA versions of the characters. They feel like imposters walking around wearing their skin. I personally found myself sitting there thinking about how Paul Williams and Henry Silva might have delivered these lines had they been cast, which isn't really fair. Finally, I think there is an element of ignorance. The perception that somehow it isn't an official part of the DCAU is just plain wrong. This might be compounded by the fact that it's a mix of BTAS backgrounds with TNBA character designs. To some, it might seem like a Frankensteinian mishmash, not really part of either world, but personally I think it looks really good. I think it's quite telling that the definitive Blu-ray collection of Batman the Animated Series doesn't include this film. That really doesn't help with the perception that Mystery of the Batwoman isn't valid, and suggests to me that Warner Brothers themselves may not have had a lot of faith in the film, and if a studio won't support the film, how can you expect the fans to? Hopefully it was just an oversight though. Either way, I would encourage anyone that hasn't seen the film to pick it up. It may not be as emotionally impactful as the best Batman episodes, but it's a decent mystery with some great action scenes. All that's left to say is, happy birthday, Mystery of the Batwoman.